we start, so we are very privileged today to have Mr. Marat Azilkhanov from the Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan, and Mr. Ambassador Ashikbayev, the Ambassador of Kazakhstan to the US, to the United States since 2021. So both of them are going to start with some introductory remarks, and then we'll move to the first panel.
Very good morning to everyone. I'm so glad to welcome all the participants of today's event. And I want first and foremost to thank our dear colleagues from Institute for European, Russian and Eurasian Studies at the George Washington University, as well as the administration of Central Asian program of the Elliott School, and particularly Professor Sebastian Peyrus, our colleagues, compatriots Marhabo Rahimov and Karligash Kabatova, for organizing this special discussion on the experience of Kazakhstan in interethnic sphere. I would also like to warmly welcome Mr. Marat Azilkhanov, Deputy Chairman of the Assembly of the President of the People of Kazakhstan, a unique constitutional body that is in existence in Kazakhstan, specifically designed to advance the unity in diversity principle and manage harmoniously ethnic diversity in our country. Let me start by saying, well, that Kazakhstan is famous, I would even claim, to supporting at the state level the preservation of ethnic identity of different ethnic groups in Kazakhstan, and this has been a consistent state policy of my country, and it's overall a policy of nation building with the inclusion of every single ethnic or religious groups. And I should mention that the name of the conference, the word in the name, which is minorities, I have a problem with that because the word minority does not exist in political lexicon in Kazakhstan. So minority, by definition, means an alienation, a division in the society. While it has been the biggest challenge for Kazakhstan was the nation building, unification. So we don't use the word minorities, and even though we have delegations coming, let's say from Germany or South Korea or Poland, who are happy to interact with their respective diasporas, but we keep claiming this is our citizens, full-fledged citizens of the Republic of Kazakhstan. So this topic is very much interesting from the standpoint of the values of peace and security, the realization of universally recognized human rights to the development of culture, language, and participating of different, of everyone, no one to be left behind in the government as equal citizens. And as I said, Kazakhstan has been and remains a strong supporter, strong advocate for interfaith and interethnic dialogue, both domestically and internationally. Cultural diversity is definitely a humanitarian value that helps understand other people, build relationship of equality and trust. And this is especially important these days with so many challenges on global stage, regionally, internationally. And we can see those hotspots across the perimeter of Kazakh border. So we believe it is important to understand the dynamics of development of not only nation of Kazakhstan, but of the entire region and of Eurasian heartland, if I may. The experience of Kazakhstan is important in this regard. So I should also mention that bold political liberalization and economic liberalization reforms carried out by the President Tokayev and his administration are definitely remarkable challenge, I would say, as we've seen from the results of the parliamentary elections this past March, that the government, the state authorities, but also the society needs to fully understand the challenges of inclusivity in Kazakhstan, because unless you have everyone contributing to the development, stability, harmonious interaction, you may not have an overall success in your reforms. So let me just end by welcoming experts and researchers representing, by the way, not only Kazakhstan and the US, but also Germany, France, so many other countries. And I very much look forward to hearing different views, approaches, opinions, and I very much hope for a very fruitful and positive discussions of this sort. Thank you.
Thank you so
Здравствуйте, уважаемые дамы и господа. Я, если правильно понимаю, идет последовательный перевод, так?
Yes.
Да. Поэтому я буду говорить с паузами для перевода. Для меня большая честь принять участие в сегодняшней встрече.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. It's really an honor for me just to participate in today's meeting.
Пользуясь случаем, хотел бы приветствовать моего друга, господина посла Казахстана в США, Ержана Нигматуллаевича Ашкбаева.
Taking this opportunity, I would like to express my really welcome for his and my dear friend, Ambassador of the Republic of Kazakhstan in the United States, Mr. Ashkbayev.
Также приветствую господина Себастьяна Пейрус и в вашем лице благодарю организаторов настоящего мероприятия, университет Джорджа Вашингтона, школу Эллиот, Центр азиатских программ, а также отдельно приветствую мою коллегу Садвакасова Айгуль Хакимбек.
I also would like to welcome Mr. Sebastian Peyrus and in your person express my gratitude to the organizers and all those involved in holding this event, the George Washington University, the Elliott School, the Center for Asian Program, as well as Aygul Sadvakasova.
Мы высоко ценим исследователей и экспертов, которые выразили готовность обсудить тему казахстанской политики в этнической сфере.
I appreciate the researchers and experts who express their readiness to discuss the topic of Kazakhstan's policy in the interethnic sphere.
Уверен, что вы много знаете о ситуации в Казахстане.
I'm really sure that everyone has a lot of information.
Что Республика Казахстан является многоэтничной, поликонфессиональной страной, в которой уже много веков присутствует многообразие культур и религий.
You know, the Republic of Kazakhstan is a multi-ethnic and polyconfessional country in which the diversity of the cultures has been present for many centuries.
Несколько слов о главных постулатах нашей государственной политики.
A few words about the main attitudes of the public policy of the Republic of Kazakhstan.
Конституция, законодательство республики в полной мере отражает основополагающие международные нормы и принципы в области прав человека, а также все механизмы защиты прав этнических групп.
The Constitution and legislation of the Republic of Kazakhstan fully reflects the fundamental international norms and principles in the field of human rights, as well as mechanism for protecting the rights of all ethnic groups.
Казахстан всемерно уважает принцип верховенства права, соблюдает международные стандарты по правам этнических групп, в том числе касающиеся их эффективного участия в жизни государства и добровольную самоидентификацию.
Kazakhstan fully respects the principles of the rule of law, observes international standards of the rights of ethnic groups, including those relating to their effective participation in the life of state and voluntary self-identification.
Могу с полной ответственностью, как человек, занимающийся этими вопросами, заявить, что мы предпринимаем меры для создания необходимых условий и поддержки для развития традиций, языков и культур всех этносов, проживающих в Казахстане.
The person who are really involved for the public policy in the sphere of interethnic relations, I can prove that Kazakhstan created really good conditions, which is provided the development of traditions, languages, and cultures of all ethnic groups in Kazakhstan. And Kazakhstanis do not experience serious concern about the preservations in their own culture, languages, and traditions.
И не случайно в нашей стране учрежден и действует особый институт Ассамблеи народа Казахстана.
Not occasion that in Kazakhstan we have real institutions who keep the policy in sphere of interethnics in our country.
Это общественная структура, но ее статус закреплен в Конституции, а деятельность нашей организации регламентирована специальным законом.
Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan is a public structure, the status of which is enshrined in the Constitution, and its activity are regulated by special law.
Я являюсь руководителем рабочего органа Ассамблеи, это секретариат. При этом секретариат является подразделением администрации президента страны, и это подтверждает особый статус и особое отношение к политике в этнической сфере.
I'm a head of the working group of the Assembly, which is named Secretariat. In turn, the Secretariat is a subdivision of the presidential administrations of our country. This confirms the special status and the attitude to politics in the interethnic sphere.
При этом основу нашей организации формирует, безусловно, этнокультурное объединение. Это неправительственные структуры, которые образуются гражданами, как и во всем мире, на добровольной основе и призваны удовлетворять этнокультурные запросы граждан.
The basis of the assembly is formed by ethnocultural association. These are non-governmental structures that are formed by citizens on a voluntary basis and are called open in cooperation with state structures to satisfy the ethnocultural needs of citizens.
Эти механизмы абсолютно не исключают право каждого индивида на самостоятельное удовлетворение своих этнокультурных прав и свобод.
It is important to note that this mechanism does not absolutely exclude the right of everyone to independently satisfy their ethnocultural rights and freedoms.
При этом важно подчеркнуть, что недискриминация и эффективное равенство – это не только добросовестное исполнение наших международных обязательств и наши конституционные постулаты. Это мы рассматриваем как залог устойчивого развития Казахстана, а также следствие сложившихся в течение многих поколений отношений добрососедства, многообразия культур и толерантного менталитета.
It is important to emphasize that non-discrimination and effective equality are not only consistent fulfillment of international obligations and our constitutional postulates. This is a guarantee of sustainable development of Kazakhstan, as well because of social relations of good neighborness, diversity of cultures, and tolerant mentality that have developed over many generations.
И нам, безусловно, было бы интересно услышать мнение участников сегодняшней встречи о нашей политике, так называемый сторонний взгляд, и это всегда полезно, в том числе для того, чтобы и совершенствовать нашу политику у нас здесь, в стране.
In the meantime, I would like to invite my colleagues to discuss one problem. As in the rest of the world, we are concerned about the problems of disinformation, provocations, and the such-called hate speech in the information space. They become shaper every year due to specific limitations and availability of communications technologies.
Да, ну, я хотел бы сейчас в дополнение к общей теме поднять одну проблематику, касающуюся вопросов дезинформации, провокации, языка вражды в информационном пространстве. Кажется, об этом уже говорилось.
Yes, because
Перевод.
they become shaper every year due to the deep implementations and availability of communications technologies.
Хотел бы просто подчеркнуть, что эта тема становится все острее, ну, в том числе в Казахстане, вследствие глубокого внедрения доступности коммуникационных технологий. И эту проблему мы ощущаем все острее с каждым днем.
So it is important to know that above-mentioned problems is actually one of the shaper and the deeper questions in our society due to the availability of the communication technology, and actually this is why there is a novelty and the actuality of these issues.
В этом направлении, конечно, в нашей стране и общество, и средства массовой информации призваны придерживаться методов фактчекинга, критического осмысления информации. В случае открытых оскорблений, дискриминации либо возбуждения вражды применяются правовые механизмы, но тем не менее важно отметить, что есть серьезные риски того, что поток ложной информации, язык вражды могут породить, особенно среди подрастающего поколения, ложные негативные стереотипы, предубеждения, и тем самым очень негативно повлиять на уровень толерантности.
This direction, of course, in our country, both society and media are called open to adhere the methods of fact-checking and crucial understanding of information. In the case of open insult, discriminations, or incitement of hostility, legal mechanisms are applied. Nevertheless, it is important to know that there are serious risks that a flow of false information and hate speech may give rise, especially among the younger generation, to false negative stereotypes and prejudices, and thus negatively affect the level of tolerance.
Думаю, что в ходе нашей дискуссии мы могли бы подумать и обменяться мнениями в отношении механизмов противодействия этим процессам. Думаю, что это в целом глобальный процесс.
I think that one of the outcomes of our discussions may be the development of common approaches to effective mechanisms to counteract these processes. I guess that this is one of the important questions for today's discussions.
Еще раз искренне благодарю за внимание к нашей стране, к вопросам сегодня, которые поднимаются. Желаю участникам конференции плодотворной работы. Заверяю, что все рекомендации, которые сегодня прозвучат, будут нами тщательно изучены и по возможности имплементированы в нашу текущую политику. Благодарю за внимание.
I really appreciate for today's attention for these really important questions. I wish the participants of the conference really fruitful work, and be sure that the recommendations which will be made today will be carefully studied by us for the possible implementations in our policy. Really appreciate and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adilkhanov, and again, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being with us today and for organizing this event with us. So we're going to start right now with our first panel. So again, welcome to the Introductory program. So in our first panel, we're going to have 3 speakers. Each of them will speak about 15 minutes, and we'll like to keep at least 15 minutes for discussion. As we are late, and again, I'm really sorry about this technical issues, but we're supposed to have a coffee break, and I think just shorten it or even cancel it. Or any of you who are here, you're welcome to go in the corridor there and take some coffee. Professor Schusser, I guess we'll have to leave a little bit earlier, so we might have to change a little bit the order. We're still going to start with Igor, then we'll move to you, and then we'll go to Mr. Yevgeny Bolger. So we're going to start with Ms. Igor Sadbukasova from Syracuse University, who is going to present and talk on the management of ethnic diversity, experience, and new challenges of Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for being with us.
Dear colleague, I am honored to address you today and would like to present an overview of Kazakhstan's public policy in the interethnic domain. During my talk, I will discuss on 3 key approach that Kazakhstan has employed to manage interethnic relations. These approaches are maintaining interethnic harmony by striking a balance among diversity, conflict prevention through the implementation of strategy to address interethnic tension and promotion social cohesion by means of integration. Additionally, I will highlight the primary challenges that public policy currently faces in the interethnic. You can see some statistic about last census of Kazakhstan 2021. As per the finding of the 2021 census, the Kazakh ethnic groups constitute the largest population, comprising over 70%. The second largest ethnic group is represented by Russians with a population exceeding 2 million. And overall, the ethnic group collectively constitute 29.65% of the population. Furthermore, over the past decade, there has been an increase. The overall population growth rate for all ethnic groups has reached 34.4%. In general, the ethnic diversity management policy in Kazakhstan focuses on promoting inclusive politics and ensuring equality among all citizens, irrespective of their ethnic background. This policy is applied uniformly to all ethnic groups, regardless of their composition. We are moving to next slide for about first approach of public policy, balance and harmony of interethnic relations. The ethnodemographic structure has undergone significant change since the country gained independence. Kazakhstan has the high proportion of the Slavic ethnic component in the first decade, and Slavic population was more urbanized and occupied niches in the industrial and managerial sectors of the economy, high education and science, while Kazakhs and other ethnic groups remained rural residents and were employed in agriculture. And next decade from 200 to 2009, as a result of external and internal migration, Kazakhs from rural areas have started to engage in urban regions, and this change have affected the labor market, education, civil servants, and business. In the next slide, show about this dynamics of urbanization of Kazakh and Russian in the person. For example, we have the Kazakh people started to urbanize from 1999 and very high level. We have nowadays 2021, but this situation faces a new challenge in the interethnic relation between different ethnic groups. For example, we have the urbanization and population concentration in metropolitan area, preserving traditional compact settlement region and ethnic groups in southern and northern Kazakhstan, and maintaining traditional areas of employment. And last decade, from 2010 to 2023, the increase in the Kazakh population has led to the growth in the use of the Kazakh language in society, as well as in media, education, and communication between different ethnic groups. And we have now the new challenge for balance, for example, of the balance in the relation between ethnic groups in closely related to change on the ratio of Kazakhs, Russians, and other ethnic groups, density of population in different regions, employment opportunity in urban areas, and participation ethnic groups in the government and public policy. Next slide mentioned about conflict preservation, like second approaches to manage the public policy. Several researchers have highlighted the risk of interethnic conflict in Kazakhstan in the first decade of independence. Significant attention was devoted to the language policy in Kazakhstan during the post-Soviet era. The recognition of the Kazakh language as a state and the Russian language as the officially used language were important measures that helped liberate tensions surrounding the language issue. And next step, the government support ethnic media education in native languages and the promotion of cultural development have been vital in preserving the self-identity, because after years of prohibition of the open expression of ethnic identity in the Soviet era, and individuals from diverse ethnic groups should connection with the kind state homelands engage the study of mother language and other factors. Additionally, the creation of Ethnocultural Association and Assembly of Public of Kazakhstan ban of the creation of political parties in ethnic grounds and statement the principle of single citizenship as a basis for the formation of the civic identity and equality of rights of citizens on the new state. And we have now new factors of conflict, such as socio-economic condition of region and the perception of social differentiation through the lens of ethnic markers. For instance, the main reason of conflict between ethnic groups in southern region were socio-economic issue and a low level of household welfare and infrastructure, and the changing behavior of young people have also become factors for this conflict. Integration is the third approaches to the public policy. For example, we challenge involved addressing twofold problem. First, to ensure the preservation of state identity in the development of the civil identity, and second, to ensure equality for all citizens. This included the prevention of discrimination and negative nationalism. You can see some statistics from civil survey. The survey results showed the mass of the population, 60.1%, first of all, experience a sense of unity in relation of their fellow citizens. At the same time, regional peculiarities are not which can change and depend on monoethnic or polyethnic area. It is important to acknowledge several state policy measures that enabled individuals from different ethnic groups to establish themselves as citizens following the restriction of rights during the Soviet period. These measures include the rehabilitation of citizen rights. It is a nearly sovereign state, particularly with regards of consequences of deportation and mass repression, the restoration of historical justice in relation to ethnic Kazakh, and the right for individuals not to indicate the nationality of their identity cards. I'm sorry for my voice, because I will talk very quickly. It's my shortage time for this. Thank you. And the next part is very important criteria for measuring the civil identity for Kazakhstan. It's state language. According to the 2021 census, 80.1% of the country population speaking state language, which is 6% higher than in 10 years ago. And Turkic-speaking ethnic groups demonstrate the highest degree of proficiency. There are the Uzbek, Uyghurs, Kyrgyz, and Karakalpak groups. At the same time, they also retain a high degree of proficiency in their native language. Among the Slavic groups, slight increase was recorded among the Ukrainians. We can see this slide demonstrates, I'm sorry for a lot of statistics, because we have every ethnic groups measure how percent of proficient of state language is here. We are moving to the next slide of strategy of integration, integrity ethnic groups in Kazakhstan. This main idea about the different ethnic groups have a different strategy of integration of the Kazakh society. For example, integration through the study of the state language, preservation of ethnic identity, integration without assimilation, the right of disseminate information, the access to education in the native language, integration through political participation, civil engagement, and social cultural isolation. It's a huge question for public policy, because different ethnic groups have a different strategy of integration. In conclusion, interethnic relations are an integral part of the social, public, and political life. Macro level changes in politics, economic, education, and media have a significant impact to interethnic relations. At the level of decision making and practical implementation of public policy, new challenges are arising due to following process. For example, I said about the different strategy politics from different ethnic groups, and this factor which influence to the strategy, such as the region of the settlements, level of urbanization, and the involvement in society life. And second big, I think, challenge is a low standard of living in village and ethno-economical inequality. The issue of the low standard in rural areas in the resulting migration to urban centers is a pressing concern for Kazakhstan. And moreover, after the pandemic, socio-economic conditions decrease. In addition, the northern region faced depopulation and a low degree of density. Third challenge is the transformation of social values among the younger generation. According to recent research, young people demonstrate a stronger sense of civil identity with the Kazakh-speaking country. And furthermore, young people in Kazakhstan do not adhere to the old standards of relation between elders and young people. And there are no longer traditional leaders who are seen as authority and idols for young people. Instead, values and moral norms have shifted. And last, my point, thank you, social media, the proliferation of hate speech and that employs ethnic markets in the information space considering issues. It's like says Mr. Azilkhanov, it's very big issues for relationship, because it's very highlight markets, the ethnic markets, and very influence for the interethnic relation in the Kazakhstan. It is important to note that the policy of Kazakhstan towards supporting ethnic diversity remains focused on maintaining balance, preserve conflicts, are promoting integration while also taking into account new challenge and arise. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angor. I mean, we'll just change a little bit the order, because Professor Nursultan has to leave in something like 10 or 15 minutes max.
6 minutes.
6 minutes. Okay, so I'll just give you the floor for a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Should I go to the podium then?
You know, you can speak. All right, it's fine.
So yes, this will be the 5-minute version of a 15-minute long talk. Thank you very much, Dr. Sabakasva, for being so brief in your remarks. You're model to us all. So this is going to be a very brief history of Uyghurs in Kazakhstan as a cross-border population. And because the short version, this will be a bit broad strokes, but there's a lesson I want to pull out of this history, because Uyghurs is a cross-border population. Their dynamics between China and what is now Kazakhstan over the past 150 years have shown certain consistencies as well as certain changes. So it's sort of continuity and change. The region we now know as Kazakhstan, that we know as Xinjiang or East Turkestan, has been deeply connected historically for centuries because of their close geographical proximity. Indeed, for example, Musa Sairami, the great Uyghur historian of the 19th century, traces his own ancestry back to the time of Sairam, what's now Kazakhstan, obviously, just one of many examples. But mass migration from Xinjiang into what is now Kazakhstan only began the late 19th century, of course, with the Russian occupation of the Ili Valley, which is adjacent to Kazakhstan, of course, 1871. The following decade of occupation gave many people we now call Uyghurs or Taranchis a strongly positive impression of Russian rule as compared to Chinese rule. And so when the region was quote unquote returned to the Qing Empire in 1881, many Uyghurs crossed the border into what's now Kazakhstan, settled in the area around Almaty. But I have to say, this was not simply a matter of choice or attraction. About 43,000 of these people resettled by Russian authorities in order to meet goals of agricultural production. And that's important because if you look at the oral histories around Uyghur life in Kazakhstan, you see this dichotomy of both Kazakhstan as a place of hope and refuge, as well as one of exile and separation from the homeland. That promise of refuge was in many ways betrayed in 1918 with the massacre by Bolsheviks of a couple of towns of Uyghurs in the Semiretia region, which prompted a migration back into what's now Xinjiang, which continued in many ways during the Soviet famines. People sought, again, refuge from the particular terror that they were experiencing. Nevertheless, this cross-border population persisted. And as many of us know, it was early Central Asia where Uyghur national identity was first sort of formalized, forged before it was reintroduced back into what we now know as the homeland of the Uyghur people. Labor migration in particular into the wealthier areas of Central Asia had led many people from Xinjiang to seek a better life in what's now Kazakhstan.
Да. Алло. Да, слушаю вас.
Вы в Павлодаре находитесь?
Нет, я в Алматы, но по всему Казахстану.
Thank you. All right. Sorry, this happens all the time on Zoom. No, but because, of course, the Soviet Piedmont policy, this is a policy whereby the Soviets would make life look really good for an ethnic group on one side of the border in order to attract political loyalties on the other side of the border. The Soviets worked hard to make it look as though life was better in the Soviet Union. And after 1949, of course, in many ways it was. But through the 30s and the 40s, the Soviets interfered extensively in the politics of East Turkestan, putting down certain national uprisings while supporting others in order to gain the political loyalties of Uyghur people. Particularly after 1949 and after the Sino-Soviet split, we see, for example, the great 1962 transborder migration of people out of Xinjiang once again into what is now Kazakhstan through the Ili Valley as they fled famines under collectivization in Mao Zedong. One important figure I'll point to, Zia Samedi, I think, exemplifies the cross-border politics of this period. Zia Samedi was born in what's now Kazakhstan in 1914. He then fled to Ili in northern Xinjiang in 1930, studied there, learned there, grew up there, then was imprisoned under a Xinjiang Soviet puppet government, which was loyal to Stalin, and then joined the Second East Turkestan Republic's government in 1944. So it's also a Soviet-backed state. But then in 1949 became the regional minister of education under the Chinese communists until his imprisonment in 1958. So in 1961, Zia Samedi returned to the Soviet Union, where with Soviet support, he encouraged Xinjiang's independence from across the border. Now, Zia Samedi, who died in 2000, is still remembered as one of the Uyghur community's greatest intellectuals and novelists for very, very good reason. So Samedi, who had moved between these two different spheres of Uyghur life and across the borders that were divided by history and politics, was at once an authentic and skilled intellectual and writer, but also an agent of the Soviet state. These are the contradictions of this period. And I think these contradictions are very generative in the history of the Uyghur people. This cross-borderness has produced a lot of culture and a lot of negotiations over what it means to be Uyghur. I point in particular to the importance of certain institutions that emerged in the Soviet period. Beginning in 1946, when a center was opened at the Academy of Sciences, the Kazakh SSR, for Uyghurological studies under Dr. Ayşem Şamiyeva, an important Uyghur linguist and textbook writer. And this grew over the several decades into eventually the Institute for Uyghur Studies under Dr. G.S. Abakasov, of course. So there is an important institutionalization of Uyghur life, which even though it served Soviet purposes in many ways, nevertheless produced an institutionalized sphere in which Uyghur people themselves often created knowledge about their own people, and that ownership of those resources, even if it was politicized, has seemed tremendously important. As proof of that, many of the Institute's graduates shortly after independence include people like Avlet Kamalov, whose work has influenced a lot of what I'm saying here. The globally admired Uyghur scholar from Kazakhstan, who's also currently the president of the Central Eurasian Studies Society. Now, although the Institute for Uyghur Studies has been reduced rather in scope into a smaller institution, nevertheless, that kind of framework has remained very important, both for the community and for the academic study of Uyghur life and Uyghur history. Nevertheless, so the 1990s in particular, as my colleague Sean Roberts can probably tell you about more later, because I have to go in 30 seconds, the 1990s was especially generative as the borders between Kazakhstan and China opened for a period of cooperation, and Uyghurs from both areas encountered each other once more. And negotiations emerged over what it meant to be truly authentically Uyghur between people who were sort of local and acculturated, the so-called Yerlik or local folks, and the newly arrived Styluk or Chinese Uyghurs, who often were much more religiously inclined and less assimilated to Soviet values. Again, this is a generative encounter as these two groups created new institutions and rituals in which they could talk about morality, identity, religion, and have kinds of rituals and ceremonies that brought together different kinds of Uyghur people in this cross-border relationship, especially through the framework of course, capitalism in the market, which is what led so many Uyghurs over the border to begin with. Now, that is again a sign of hope, but I'm a historian, I have to say critical things. And so I do have to point out that since especially Kazakhstan's joining of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a founding member, Kazakhstan has often cooperated with the Chinese authorities in terms of cracking down on Uyghur activism across the borders. And especially recently, as certain activists in Kazakhstan have advocated for example, the repatriation of Uyghur citizens of Kazakhstan have been caught up in the well-documented program of extrajudicial detention and human rights abuses in the region, the government has not seemed to take a very active role in defending its citizens who are stuck in China. And one must wonder if, like in the imperial period and like in the Soviet period, in some ways, Uyghurs are still seen as inherently outsiders who can be instrumentalized for geopolitical purposes. Now, you're shaking your head, obviously, but this is how it looks when you take the Uyghur point of view on these things. So that is my brief and critical history of Uyghurs in Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for your attention. I have to go, but if you want to look me up, you can find me here at GW. Thank you very much, and thank you to my colleagues and Professor Beirut.
Thank you so much. So our third speaker is Mr. Yevgeny Bolkert from the Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan, and the title of his presentation is Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan in the Context of Political Reform. So Mr. Bolkert, I'm so sorry that we had to change the order, but the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, dear ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Some of my points have already been noted in previous speeches, but I would like to share my vision on interethnic relations in Kazakhstan and the role of the Assembly of People of Kazakhstan in this matter. So Kazakhstan is a multi-ethnic state where the development of harmonious interethnic relations and tolerance is the priority of the state policy. All relevant principles and guarantees are enshrined in the constitution, which declares that no one can be subjected to any discrimination, including based on origin, gender, race, nationality, language, religion, etc. Kazakhstan's experience in strengthening peace and harmony, implementing non-discrimination principles, and contributing to interethnic and interfaith dialogue received high praise at the Interparliamentary Union Assembly in March this year, attended by representatives from 140 parliaments. I had the honor of representing Kazakhstan at this high-level forum in the Kingdom of Bahrain. I had a unique opportunity to see how many areas of instability, local and regional conflicts, human casualties, humanitarian disasters, human rights violation, and discrimination based on national and other characteristics exist in the world. Unfortunately, there is no universal answer to these challenges. In this context, I would like to emphasize the role of the Assembly of People of Kazakhstan, which is the key institution for integrating representatives of ethnic groups into the national community, centered around the Kazakh people and the Kazakh language as the state language. The Assembly is a public institution with constitutional status that brings together ethnocultural associations, Center for Ethnomediations, Council of Mothers, Elders, volunteers, and youth unions. These platforms cover a wide range of activities, from charity to the development of national level projects. The Assembly is a proponent of the principles of unity in diversity, and we are different, but we are equal. At the same time, this institution continues to evolve in accordance with the spirit of the times. As part of the recent constitutional reforms, including a political system, the Assembly has also undergone improvement. Since January of this year, the quota of the Assembly has been transferred from the Majlis to the Senate in the Parliament, with 5 senators appointed by the President's decree upon the recommendation of the Assembly Council. Senators from the Assembly have a mandate to represent the interests of all ethnic and cultural associations in the legislative process. Cooperation with the Assembly is one of the 9 priorities of the Senate's work. This significantly raises the status of the Assembly, strengthens legislative expertise in terms of compliance with the principles of unity and consent, and takes into account the interest of all ethnic groups living in Kazakhstan. As already noted by the ambassador, we do not use the term national minorities, preferring to say, for example, simply Kazakhstan Germans. For instance, the Association of Kazakhstan Germans is one of the most active and largest ethnic public associations represented in all regions of the Republic. The Kazakh German community has a well-developed infrastructure, including a network of youth clubs, a board of trustees, a business club, and much more. Cultural events, theater productions, language courses, creative workshops, and newspaper are held on a regular basis. All of this takes place based on the Kazakhstan German Center in the capital city, German houses in Pavlodar and Almaty, as well as the houses of friendship located in every region. The Kazakh German community is actively involved in the public life, maintains close ties with Germany, organizes meetings and events with representatives of German institutions, and promotes the development of interstate cultural and economic ties between Kazakhstan and Germany. According to the 2021 population census, the number of ethnic Germans has shown a positive trend compared to 2011, increasing by the 46,000 people to reach 226,000. In my opinion, this is possible due to several reasons. Firstly, the result of the domestic policy in the interethnic sphere, where citizens can freely indicate their nationality with which they identify. Secondly, the natural increase and high birth rate due to stable economic conditions. Thirdly, existing opportunities for self-realization and in various fields of activity. To make it clear, let me provide my own personal experience as an example. I am 38 years old, born and raised in Kazakhstan, and have 3 wonderful sons. I currently hold the position of chairman of the board of trustees of the Foundation of Kazakhstan Germans, member of the presidium of the National Chamber of Entrepreneurs at Amiken, the president of the Astana Triathlon Federation, and a senator in the parliament of Kazakhstan. The special mentality of good neighborliness, openness, and hospitality inherent primarily in the Kazakh people has become characteristic of every citizen of Kazakhstan. The famous Kazakh hospitality was also felt by people who were forced to leave Ukraine and Russia. The recent migration influx of neighboring countries' citizens was perceived by experts as a certain threat, and many predicted conflicts, including interethnic ones. There were some minor conflicts that were mostly of a local and household nature. However, the local population, in the spirit of good neighborliness, welcomed the migrants, and many extended a helping hand, providing food, shelter, and work. This was noted primarily by the relocators themselves. In conclusion, I would like to once again emphasize that the Kazakhstani model of building a society of harmony in the multi-ethnic state is unique, and I'm convinced deserves to be studied. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tokayev. So the good news is that we have a bit of time for discussion, so I'm going to open the floor, maybe first to our audience here. Any questions to our speakers? Yes, sir. Can you just use the microphone? It's here. And introduce yourself first. Thank you.
I'm Peter Humphrey, a intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I was wondering if the nation gathers statistics on sort of anthropological basis. For example, things like intermarriage rates, which two groups are intermarrying and how often. I'm wondering about things like crime statistics. I'm wondering if the ethnic minorities are liaising with ethnic minorities in neighboring Central Asian countries, for example, the Kordios. Are they talking to Koreans in Uzbekistan too? So that sort of fine gradation of anthropological statistics to help move policy in more favorable directions. And of course, education rates amongst the various groups. My big surprise in Kazakhstan was when I walked into Russian churches and saw that a third of the faces there were Kazakh faces. That was an amazing thing. And families who had converted 100 years ago.
Yes. Yeah, Professor, thank you so much for your question, because yes, we have some statistics about the marriage level, and but I'm not sure about the open statistic about crime in the interethnic, because our politics of Kazakhstan don't present every question shows the ethnic diversity, because we have just one statement about all of citizens. It is equality, because ethnic groups is very important for intercultural and unified the all of people for one civil identity. But we have the different statistic about the marriage, ages of the regions, settlements for the sources, ethnic markers. The marriage statistic very interesting for indicated the relationship between closely ethnic groups. For example, we have the big rate of intermarriage among the Russian, Kazakh, Korean, and Belarusian, Ukrainian, some of such as Slavic and Germany ethnic groups has a big rate of intermarriage. And nowadays we have the new wave of intermarriage relation between small and some closely keeping the ethnic self identity. For example, the Uyghurs, Dungans, and Kurds and Turk. It's very interesting. Fixed recorded the new trends of the intermarriage statistics nowadays. And yes, if I clearly remind your question about Koreans and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and Korean, for example, yes, not every, maybe some ethnic groups have a ethnic association, have a good relationship between ethnic association of the Kazakhstan and other country, for example, is kind state homeland of these ethnic groups. For example, can you say the Evgeny Volger about the relation between Germany and Kazakhstan, South Korea and Kazakhstan, Russia and Kazakhstan, so the ethnic groups, yes. And we have the interesting topic about collaboration, not just the cultural relationship and the industrial relationship. For example, the opened the new business in the Kazakhstan. For example, the South Korea has some investors in the Kazakhstan rural areas, especially for Almaty region, Jambol region, open the new farmers, for example, and etc. Different activities between our two countries. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Volger, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you. Yeah, Ms. Advocaso has already mentioned everything. My point. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to take a couple of questions from our online audience. We have one question on the violent events which happened in February 2020 in the region of Korda in the Oblast of Jambul, which, as you may know, which led more than 20,000 people, most of them Dungans, to flee the villages where this violence erupted. So the question is, what are the mechanisms in Kazakhstan to prevent such events, and how were the recommendations of the United Nations being implemented regarding these events in Korda?
Yes, thank you. It's a big question. Yes, unfortunately, we had this conflict in the borders of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan between Kazakh and Dungan peoples who live in the local area in this Jambul region. But I once said about it's not just ethnic relationship. It is between based on the so many researches of Institute of Applied Ethnopolitical Research. We have the different situation in the agriculture sphere, in the right of the establish the ethno-economical inequality. And I said about these challenges for our rural regions, because the high level of urbanization of Kazakh people is a low level of income in the rural area, faces the new challenge between different ethnic groups in the every social differentiation face like this ethnic markers. It's very deeply a relation between people who lived in the Jambu area approximately 140 years. Yes, Kazakhstan's government has a special program for this area after this situation 2020 and implemented the new mechanism for prevention the conflict in the especially rural region. For example, the government and local government spent the if I clearly remain about this statistics, for example, 3 million tenge spent to the establish the new infrastructure and the new opportunities for development, rural household, etc., and involving the new rules to the local schools, because the Jambu area has especially settlement position between ethnic groups. For example, we have the just mono-ethnical village and polyethnical village, and some 3 big village are the mono-ethnical, which in the every village live the 99% of people from one ethnic groups, and another village, for example, it's a very close settlement. They are the polyethnical, and based on our researches, we know finding there's a different relation between mono-ethnical and polyethnical areas. It's very interesting. And we have the intermarriage indicators, we have the civil identity marriage measure, and we have the ethnical marriage, but we don't everything they clearly understand about economical relationship. It is a new challenge for us. And after that, the government recommended for all local government use this program for implementing this practice. For example, open discuss between different ethnic groups people, and we have the some stereotype about the ethnic groups. For example, it's very traditional, about a very mystical sometimes this opinion, but it's not possible today. For implemented the new rule, we have the provide the new deeply researches between these people, and provided the new educational program in the school and for adult people. Thank you so for this question.
Thank you, very good. I mean, you answered very well. I just want to give a chance to Mr. Volga if you want to add anything. No. Okay, so I mean, I still have a couple of questions from our audience, so maybe I'll give. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Alex Sanchez, analyst in Washington. One question that you, Professor, mentioned a little bit in your last remarks. Can you talk more about the Kazakhstan's educational system and how it teaches its history when it comes to its ethnic diversity? When it comes to middle school, high school, are Kazakh students thought like, well, this is why there's so many ethnic Russians living here, or so many ethnic Germans living in another part of this history of the Tungans, of the Uyghurs. What is the national curriculum look like when it comes to teaching young Kazakhs before they reach the age of 18, why their country is so diverse? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. It's yes, it's a really big question about national history, because after the Soviet era, we have the very short history of Kazakhstan Republic, and nowadays our scientists and historical elaborate about the whole time in every different type of history of Kazakhstan, like the trends of the world history. And for example, we have the new curriculum and the new textbooks about all of school for government districts. because Kazakhstan has one system standards of education, but we have the different education language. For example, we have the Kazakh language schools, the Russian language schools, and some schools in the different region depend of density of ethnic population. For example, we have the school in Uyghurs language, the Uzbek language, and other ethnic groups learned your mother language in the edition program. But the history of Kazakhstan elaborate and mention it about whole type of history, because we have the different ethnic history background for different ethnic groups. And but whole Kazakhstan history include all of history of all of ethnic groups in Kazakhstan. I don't clearly about how degree have how the topic, but it's all system include the history about all ethnic groups in Kazakhstan, and we have especially program for adult and for the civil servants about the history memory and history background, like they want ground for unify of all national buildings in Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bolger? I don't see. Okay. So we have a couple of more questions from our online audience. One is, so Mr. Ambassador actually challenges in introductory remarks the notion of minorities, ethnic or whatever minorities. But as one of our attendees explained, we still have this term, we use this term, for example, in policy papers in academia. So the question is, what alternatives would could speaker use? Is it de facto to avoid this notion?
Thank you. Yes, this question is have had a more discussed in our country, in our academic audience. For example, yes, our constitution rule or the and other rules don't include the clearly ethnic minority like the international terms, for example. In terms discuss, we use the term of ethnic groups or representative of ethnic groups, for example, because this Kazakhstan politics mention it, if we use ethnic minorities, we may or maybe we have to make the differentiation between all of ethnic groups depend of number of ethnic groups. Is not possible for our politics because every citizen have equality rule of the country. And the ethnic minority, yes, the academic sphere you use this term, but not use in the public sphere, especially for addressed to the ethnic groups, because our ethnic associations is not agree with this term because they said about not minority, we are the equality citizen in our country. If I mention it the short version, it's right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bolger, do you want to add anything? I just want to give you a chance to take the floor if you want, sorry.
Yeah, I'm actually fully support my colleague. So we use usually the, yeah, like I said in my speech as well. So we use the term the ethnic group. So that's why it's, in my opinion, it's a good answer that was already mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience here? Yes, sir. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bakhtiar. I'm from Kazakhstan. I would like to ask this question. So in Kazakhstan, we have this term Kazakhstani and Kazakhs. So in your opinion, does it determine Kazakhstan, is it uniting our people in Kazakhstan, or is a big sacrifice for Kazakhs? Why don't we use Kazakh Russian, Kazakh German, Kazakh Uyghur, and why we have this Kazakhstani when no other countries have it? Thank you.
Thank you. It's also a big question. It's several researchers elaborate this question. For example, we have the different research in the Professor Sebastian Perus, Professor Marlon Laruel, and Christopher Rees and others. Yes, it's really interesting situation between identify, yes, how we are. It's a big topic for today discuss. How we are. It's some people identify yourself as Kazakhstani because first criteria for this identification is citizen of Kazakhstan of Republic. And next identify criteria, for example, it's following with different group of peoples. For example, it's, first of all, there may be ethnic groups, maybe religions group, maybe local group, maybe professional group. If we mention it about these different groups, we have the different differentiation between these identified criteria. But nowadays, Kazakhstan people have all of these mentioned criteria, like such as the Kazakhstani, such as the Kazakh. But Kazakh, it's a term of the ethnic identity for many people. But for Kazakh people, the civil identity and ethnic identity criteria is very close, but not close for different ethnic groups. I think this process is reached in the during the maybe future time is for future, and we just mentioned it about this phenomena, but we don't have clearly answer for this question. It's really a situation. Yes, we live in this situation. I think it's my question, my answer for this question. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I mean, we really need to finish now because we have to move to the second panel in 5 minutes.
Yes, okay. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start next panel. Please be sure that everyone is here. So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is also Aygul. Yes, where I came from Syracuse. Nowadays, actually, Aygul Kushurbayeva. Originally, at work, I'm at Academy of Public Administration, so the Republic of Kazakhstan, which is under the president. And I'm Doctor of Economic Science. And here in United States, I do my really good research in terms of the public policy. And thank you very much for the Center for Asian Studies just to invite me to be a moderator of today's panel. And I'm going to start. Okay, this is my brief explanations. And we are going to start the next session or next panel. And actually, we are going to start from our Professor German Kim, who is a doctor of the historical science, and actually he is a professor, honorary worker of the Kazakhstan, and now he is the head of the Institute of Asian Studies at Kazakh State National University, named after Al-Farabi. Professor Kim, he is really famous and famous person in Kazakhstan who really work in the sphere of interethical issues. And nowadays, just he more famous because actually the list of his scientific publications in more than 120 titles, and including the 20 monographs. And actually, this is a really good achievement for Professor Kim. And German, So the floor is yours, but at the beginning, I have to say that we have 4 panelists for today's session, and each of them have no more than the 15 minutes. And I'm going to be a strict moderator. Okay, and today we are going to speak, Professor German Kim, he's going to speak about the ethnic diversity in Kazakhstan in historical, retrospective, and modern terms. The floor is yours.
Good morning or good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to me see my old friends and colleagues and have my talk on the ethnic diversity in my country, in Kazakhstan. I prepared my PowerPoint presentation and would like to demonstrate it. Just a second, I have to find it. Do you see it? Do you see the presentation? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, then on the first one.
Yes.
Actually, that is mission impossible to squeeze in 10 minutes this 1,000-year-long history of origin of ethnic diversity in Kazakhstan. But I'll try just, to share some ideas on the main stages in the formation of this ethnic diversity in Kazakhstan, starting from ancient time and then switching to Russian colonial rule, Soviet period, and then independent Kazakhstan. I will not, explain in details the ethnogenesis of Kazakh people, I mean the titular nation and the recent Kazakhstan, but my colleagues, Sean Roberts, will agree with me that even still nowadays we have, some diversity even among Kazakh. I mean, the origin of these Kazakh people. For example, we separately call the Kazakh origin of Koja or Chingizid or Tulingid. Yeah, in all of this group of Kazakh, we mentioned then the other ethnic origin, other bloods, which are mixed with the blood of the autonomous population of the ancient Kazakhstan. Or we all know about the Great Silk Road or Silk Roads, and you see here the map, which was aggregated by Michael Franceschi. Apropos, he is from Washington, but not from George Washington. He's from Washington, St. Louis, and he made this map that is actually a GIF map showing that, the 75% of the Silk Roads is overlapping the old pathways of nomad tribes. And there are different tribes on the Silk Roads. And we know then which great role played the Silk Road in exchange, not only on the goods, but also peoples from different origins and cultures and religion and knowledge and technology and so on and so on. Yeah. That means, we have also many other artifacts of this old relationship with the people living in the Great Steppe and the neighboring countries, not only neighboring, even we have also evidences of the relationships between Kazakh and Koreans, but in that time not Koreans, which we call Koreans, yeah, but the people from one of the early Korean states, like the Silla Kingdom. Russian colonization of Kazakh steppe. It was a very important stage in the making the population so diverse. It started late 19th, 1820s. So and Russia began colonize the territories belonging to today to Kazakhstan. And that led to the influx of Russian settlers, who were militaries, farmers, laborers, and traders. And as a result, by the end of the 19th century, Russians accounted for about 8% of the population of Kazakhstan. The next stage is a stage connected with the drastic changes of the ethnic population in Sovietizing Kazakhstan. And you see here the data of two censuses of population of 26 and 39. Yeah, we know that the population, the census of population 39 is very falsified during the Stalin totalitarian regimes, and many people died from repression and from, this Golodomor, so on. And you see that the really drastic changes that the indigenous population of the steppe, Great Steppe or Kazakhstan, decreased from 58 to 78, yeah, approximately. That means the Kazakh became the ethnic minority. Even we don't use this notion in our official academic discourse of Kazakhstan, but speaking in English, I'm using also because everybody from English-speaking audience understand that is not only axiological notion, which means minority is not good to be a minority. Yeah. That's why I'm using in English language minority, but not in Russian. Yeah. Because in English language, it has another connotations and nuances that's in Russian language. Okay, next is in the Soviet time, because it is ethnic cleansing period, yeah. Or we are also avoiding to use these notions of ethnic cleansing. We are calling it ethnic deportation, started from 37 and ended by the end of the Second World War, or we call it the Great Patriotic War. Yeah. So and about 3.5 million people were deported to Kazakhstan. For example, just the German, there were over 1 million. Yeah, and the most of these people, the unreliable people, they were relocated, mass and forced relocated from the western part to Kazakhstan or to Uzbekistan, and also to the region of Siberia, but only to the Koreans. You can see only the Koreans, they were deported from the eastern part of the Soviet Union to the western part. Yeah. And then in the Soviet time, because of the great migration was during the Second World War, or we call it the Great Patriotic War. Yeah, 1.5 million people were evacuated from the western parts of Soviet Union to Kazakhstan. And the new arrivals were mostly Russians or Ukrainians, and they settled in the cities and towns, contributing increase of urbanization and industrialization. And this influx had a profound impact on the culture and society of Kazakhstan, because the Russian language became more prevalent and the traditional Kazakh way of the life began to change with this urbanization and industrialization. Another stage is the so-called Virgin Land campaign, started in the 60s, and this campaign was aimed to increase the agricultural products and make and achieve the safety of the food. And the large numbers of young people, they were not forcibly, but organizedly removed from the other parts of Soviet Union, almost from all other Soviet republics to Kazakhstan. And this influx of population had a significant impact on the demography and culture of Kazakhstan, as it changed the ethnic and the linguistic composition of country. And then we can see the changes in recent Kazakhstan. It means after the gain of sovereignty and in the period of nation building period of sovereign Kazakhstan, Republic of Kazakhstan. There are two census of population. Actually, 23. It's not the census, but it is running statistics for the year. Actually, that is for 22. 89 was the last Soviet census of population, and we have in our country two censuses. That was 99 and 2009. If I'm not wrong, yeah, after 10 years, I guess. Yeah, so we and you can see that the Kazakh, the number of Kazakh increased so over 1/3, yeah, and then the non-Kazakh population, to be exactly the population of European race. It means the Slavic, Russian, Ukrainians, and German decreased drastically. Especially, we look, the Germans made 4%. Around 1 million Germans were in Soviet Kazakhstan on the eve of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and right now it's just 1%. And now I'm coming to my conclusion, and just a second. So just a second, please. I lost the slide, maybe. Okay. Sorry. In my conclusion, I mentioned that the ethnic population in Kazakhstan was for a long time very diverse. and still is very diverse. We are using this notion that Kazakhstan is a, like a slogan, planet of 130 ethnic groups and or peoples. But in fact, the first 10 biggest in number ethnic groups, of course, in the first place are Kazakh. They made around 94% of the total population. There are some ethnic groups, very small. They are numbering just a dozen of people or less. Yeah, for example, we have Japanese, and the last Japanese died a couple of years ago. Or we Koreans, we are 108,000, and we made just 0.01% of the total population. So, and then nevertheless, the population in the recent Kazakhstan is very diverse, with several dozens of ethnic groups. So the Kazakh are native population and titular nation of country, but other ethnic groups are parts of the people of Kazakhstan. We are using this notion also as a official notion, people of Kazakhstan. And but these ethnic groups belonging to the people of, or making the people of Kazakhstan, they are differing in number, length of residence, culture, language, religion, etc., etc. The adult population of, sorry?
Chairman, I'm sorry, just as your time is limited, so you have to.
Okay, time is agreement. Okay, then just I need a minute, maybe less. It means that the adult population, non-Kazakh population, they all have three identities. First of all, that is a national identity. They are all citizens of Kazakhstan, and they belong to the people of Kazakhstan. But this adult non-autochthonous population, they preserve also ethnic identity strongly. They know they are Germans, Chechens, or Koreans. But the most representatives of these ethnic groups, they have also diaspora identity. So, and it was mentioned today in the first panel in the question that what is about the ethnically mixed marriages and families? Do we have statistics or no? The scholars, they are getting these statistics. The scholars, who studied these topics, and hypothetically, children in these ethnically mixed families, they may have a blurred awareness of their national, ethnic, and diaspora identity. And this, in these terms, we don't have no statistics, but we can get these data in interviews and questionnaires. It means as scholars, we can get these data. For the foreign audience, or even the ordinary audience and people, it is not easy to get such statistics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. So, dear audience, and actually, if you have questions, of course, you can prepare all of the questions. So after all speakers will be done. And of course, just as the audio in a Zoom session, just you also have an opportunity to write your questions in the chat, and mandatory, just I will declare all of your questions, just which is coming. So now we are turning for the next speaker, and she's also just going to join us by online, because thank you very much for the digitalization. So actually, this is really good opportunity to see and hear each of one, even with our And now we are going to hear the Beata Enchman. She's from the Center of East European and International Studies, which is an independent international publicity-funded research institute. And actually, she's an expert on Central Asia, and her specialization is about the interethnic relations, national minorities, nationality policy in Central Asia. Of course, she has a lot of publications and books. One of the recent books was published, and now she's going to share her opinion with us in terms of what is the unity, diversity, slogan, and reality. It's kind of the question, just raise questions from the professor. So, Beata, are you with us?
Hello.
Please, the floor is yours. You have another 15 minutes. Yes.
Okay. Hello from Berlin. I'm really happy to be part of this exciting event, but I guess it's not so easy to tell you something new after the previous interesting presentations. I try my best, and as always, I'm afraid my approach is much more critical than the others before. Thank you, German, for your historical introduction. I will make the follow-up now, because I would like to start with the situation in the beginning of the 1990s. Kazakhstan was and is a multinational state, which posed particular challenges for the country's leadership in these times. And even though the narrative of the impending clash between ethnic groups was used to legitimize Nursultan Nazarbayev's increasingly authoritarian style of rule, in retrospect, I would say that policy was correct. The nationalities policies, which paid a lot of attention to the nationalities question in Kazakhstan. And I like the ideas to diffuse the situation very much. By ideas, I mean the attempt to give non-Kazakh citizens a sense of belonging and participation with the slogan, Kazakhstan is our common home, and the attempt to give the state and its people a civic Kazakhstani identity in addition to an ethnic Kazakh one. Part of the development of this Kazakhstani identity was that the members of the many different ethnic groups could rediscover and live their own ethnic identity and represent their interests in the nowadays ECOS and the ANK. The idea was that once the ethnic identity was established again, the people would become civic Kazakhstanis in the end. According to the official Kazakhstan, this was a successful approach. With the renaming of the Assemblea Narodov Kazakhstana the population of Kazakhstan not longer consisted of peoples in plural, but there was one nation of Kazakhstanis. And in 2015, President Nazarbayev explicitly declared that there was now one unified nation of Kazakhstanis. The slogan now was "One people, one nation," or unity in diversity. There has been much discussions among Western scholars about whether the Kazakhstani concept was really successful. That means whether there's really unity. This discussion was very often based on opinion polls in which the respondents had to decide whether they identified either with their ethnicity or as Kazakhstani. This missed the point, as they usually identified with both, as we were able to show in a 2019 opinion poll. And one of our results was that a strong ethnic identity also leads to a strong civic identity. That means people in Kazakhstan, ethnic minorities in Kazakhstan have a multiple identity. But in my opinion, however, this is not the most important problem nowadays. Much more burdensome for the current situation and for peaceful coexistence in the future is, first, that it has never been clearly stated what this Kazakhstani identity means. And it's very often something different has been said in Kazakh than in Russian about this content of the Kazakhstani identity. And the second problematic point is that efforts to spread the Kazakhstani identity were very much focused on non-Kazakhs, and the Kazakhs were forgotten. The result is that Kazakhs and members of the small ethnic groups rationally and emotionally associate different things with the term Kazakhstani. The representatives of the small ethnic groups I interviewed never tired of emphasizing that they were Kazakhstanis. For them, this obviously means identifying with a state that enables them to live their ethnic identity at the same time, whereby the constant repetition of "muy Kazakhstanci" indicates that they have a certain fear that the future could worsen their status. Kazakhs, as we all know, do not like the term Kazakhstani. In our survey, however, they identified themselves most strongly with the term Kazakhstani of all the ethnic groups surveyed, and only slightly more strongly ethnically as Kazakhs. For them, there seems to be no difference between an ethnic identity as Kazakhs and a civic identity as Kazakhstanis. And thus the fears of the non-Kazakhs would be well-founded. In relation to the slogan, unity in diversity, this can be summarized as the unity of the diverse population has become a Kazakh-dominated unity in recent years. This is understandable. The proportion of Kazakhs in the total population has increased by nearly 30% since 1989. And it is clear that this has an impact on everyday life and politics. And some aspects that are criticized today as Kazakhization do not have negative consequences for the small ethnic groups. For example, the renaming of places and streets and the rediscovery of Kazakh history is not nationalistic per se and is not directed against a population group, but it's an act of decolonization. And even the controversial promotion of the Kazakh language is not a disaster for many representatives of small ethnic groups. Then for them, Kazakh is no more a mother tongue than Russian. And at least the emotional barriers toward Kazakhs are not as high as in the case of the Russians. And I know a lot of non-Kazakhs who nowadays have good knowledge of Kazakh. But that's not, in my opinion, not so critical aspects. What I see with concern and what I criticize is that many Kazakhs increasingly see Kazakhstan as their country, in which they per se must be better off than their non-Kazakh fellow citizens. In my opinion, this is also due to the fact that the country's leadership has for years been concerned with the smaller ethnic groups, but has simply let the rediscovery of everything Kazakh, as well as the development of a Kazakh nationalism go by, and has not tried to communicate what is special about the civic Kazakhstani identity to the majority population of the Kazakhs as well. In the worst case, the consequences can be observed in interethnic clashes, of which there have only been very few so far, thanks God. But these events are usually attributed by officials to social economic causes. But what is interesting and frightening is that often, and for example, in the 2019 events in Kordai, which were mentioned before as well, is that the perception of the Kazakhs that their non-Kazakh neighbors citizens of Kazakhstan like them were economically better off than them. And that was a trigger for the said events. The way to avoid further clashes is therefore not only in the field of economics, but also in communicating to the Kazakh population that all citizens of the country are equal and that Kazakhstan benefits from its ethnic diversity. Appreciating differences and diversity is in a positive way and showing that they do not threaten unity is a task that many other states and societies also face, including Germany, my home country, for example. And it's obviously not easy, but Kazakhstan has decades of experience with multi-ethnicity, as German showed, so the task should not be unsolvable. However, it requires more attention and commitment than it has in Kazakhstan at the moment, in my opinion. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Beata. You are really just saved another 3 minutes just in our discussion. So thank you very much. And of course, the respect questions you can keep it just and we still have a time just to ask these questions. And now just I'm going to present and give the floor for the next speaker. She is an associate professor of political science at Nazarbayev University, which is located in Kazakhstan. Of course, her name is Kassym-Jomart, and she is really provide good research in the field of comparative politics, national identity, immigration control, and Eurasian politics. And now she's going to present or just to call us for discussion the really important questions just in terms of the public policy, in terms of the interethnic policy in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Such called questions are like deconstructing dual citizenship, exploring citizenship attitudes and practices in Kazakhstan. Dear Professor, are you with us? Aris?
I am, yes. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Even online. Please give us the next 15 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, share my screen here. And sure that it's enlarged. Okay, I'm going to just start talking while I'm getting my slides up. So thank you so much. I'm just going to continue in this same sort of vein that my colleagues have started and so nicely set out by, elaborating a few things that have to do with the ethnic Russian population. And let me maybe just start with a little bit of a provocation in terms of this sort of word ethnic minorities that we've been kind of tossing around and debating during our time here. And I wonder if we take ethnic minorities off the table, if that means that we also need to take ethnic majorities off the table, if we also take minority off the table. So this is just something to think about as we go forward. So I hope actually that through this talk and through the work that we're developing, that we're actually going to help complicate this idea of categorizing ethnic groups in Kazakhstan in really concrete ways. Because as my colleagues have mentioned in the last couple of presentations, the reality is just really a lot more complex than the government categories, the passport nationalities, the ways that we ask about ethnicity on surveys. These categories really can't capture the diversity that's actually happening in the hybridity and the complexity that's actually going on in Kazakhstan. So the thoughts that I would like to share come from a paper I'm developing with a graduate student at Nazarbayev University, Diaz Takyanov. He's already presented some of these findings in an article in Khabar Asia, which I'll put in the chat a little bit later, that develops the security nexus of our research. Please don't hold him responsible for anything that I say, because we're still kind of hashing out some of the interpretations. But we started this project by really wanting to understand how states in the Russian world react when Russia aims aggressive citizenship policies towards citizens abroad. And what we found is that there's actually nothing that could be called passportization going on in Kazakhstan, like what happened in Ukraine or Georgia or Moldova. Nevertheless, the government is taking what we consider to be a security-oriented approach that develops a reaction against dual citizenship in parallel with its approach towards separatism. Kind of maybe a political sort of component that's driving however, there's a mismatch between the security approach and how citizens actually perceive citizenship, Russian citizenship and Kazakhstani citizenship, which is actually a much more instrumental view of citizenship. The consequence of this mismatch is really that it further reifies a sort of ethnic sorting and loyalty and categorization instead of embracing the hybridity that is actually present in Kazakhstan and that's present in what it means for people to actually belong to Kazakhstan. So I just want to present a few bits of the evidence that we've collected. First, we show in our paper that the prosecution of dual citizenship cases has risen dramatically since the annexation of Crimea, so since 2014, but that these cases are primarily concentrated in the north of Kazakhstan, and that the citizenship in question that people are getting as their second citizenship is Russian citizenship. Prosecutions of dual citizenship often result in things like a fine, removal from Kazakhstan, deportation. How is this linked with separatism? Well, our argument is based primarily on timing. So also in 2014, there was a new clause introduced into the criminal code that dealt with, that deals with separatist activity, which can also result in the loss of citizenship. Prosecutions using this new code in the criminal, or this new clause in the criminal code, are less dramatic, but there have been about 20 cases prosecuted since 2015, mostly in the northern regions. If you're following the news, you know that there's a separatism case being tried right now that was discovered not too long ago, and this is actively being prosecuted through the courts and being discussed in social media. But what do people that actually go to Russia and consider consider getting Russian citizenship say about the value of Russian citizenship and what meaning that it has for them? Well, there's a couple of observations that we have from interviews. The first is that ethnic Russians from Kazakhstan are very likely to be treated as foreigners in Russia. They're likely to be called Kazakhs because outside of Kazakhstan, there's not this understanding that Kazakh means something ethnic. People just don't know this about Kazakhstan. And so they don't debate this, this Kazakhstani sort of conception because they have no idea. So people outside of, when ethnic Russians go abroad to Russia, they're treated as Kazakhs. The second is that the motivation to get Russian passports is often very instrumental, right? It's often to facilitate access to work. It's just a pragmatic decision, right? It's just an issue of opportunities. It's often not identity driven. So we have a number of people, kind of reflecting on their idea of like, well, going to Russia, it's not really about identity. I don't feel this sense of belonging to Russia. It's just a passport. It's just about opportunities. However, we do see that there is potentially a generational sort of gap on this, and this is something that we want to investigate a little bit more in our future interviews. in our future research, because I think that that you find different things with different age groups in Kazakhstan, and this is something that that is really important going forward. We also find that people view dual citizenship generally favorably. They would like this. This doesn't necessarily mean divided loyalties for them. It's seen as, again, just as something that would allow them to kind of hedge their bets and retain a belonging to Kazakhstan, which is important to them, even though they might want to have, you know, facilitated access to opportunities in Russia as well. However, things have really changed since the war. We found that things have changed since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that the value of Russian citizenship is now basically worthless, right? Because it's become something that's really toxic rather than something that's actually providing opportunities. So this is kind of a really brief overview of the things that we're finding from our data. But how do we interpret this very largely instrumental view of citizenship on the one hand, with the state's policy and practice on the other hand? So I see dual citizenship prosecutions that I talked about in the first part of my presentation as a type of sorting between our Russians, or the ones who are willing to be loyal to Kazakhstan as their home, and their Russians, or those that have no particular loyalty to Kazakhstan. So in some ways it's a loyalty test. And again, because prosecution of dual citizenship is levied against primarily ethnic Russians in Kazakhstan's north, I interpret this to mean that ethnic Russians are really seen as a big threat to Kazakhstan. But at the same time, when you have a part of your population, a part of your multi-ethnic population that is about 15%, you can't build a successful nation building strategy when you frame a particular part of your population as a threat. So, I mean, I think glossing over these racial elements with security concerns, which seems to be kind of the way that this is framed, is part and parcel of the way that of Soviet ways of dealing with cultural difference. And so it's learned behavior, but it also denies the ability for a truly sort of post-colonial identity to develop that includes all of the population that is currently, you know, belonging to or citizens of Kazakhstan. So I think that the main threat, or the main kind of problem, I think that comes out of this research, or that identifies through this research, is that sorting practices like prosecution of dual citizenship, probably like the way that we ask about ethnicity on surveys, in censuses, the way that we put this on past identity cards and things like this, it presents oversimplified categories that the government really hands down to people that don't give them the language to talk about the complexity of national identity as it actually occurs. It merges ethnicity and language and religion oftentimes, and these are not clean categories. So is there really something that's objectively ethnic Kazakh? Or is there so much diversity and variation within this category that actually it makes much less sense to talk about this as one homogeneous category, because maybe, you know, parts of this group share more in common with, you know, with other groups, right? So troubling our understanding of what these categories mean and the hybridity that these uncover is something that we really need to think about as we're going forward with our research. And again, what we see as a result of the war is that the Russians in Kazakhstan are really not like many of the Russians in Russia. We see this through the war. We see this through the mobilization, migration that has kind of put Russian Russians next to Kazakhstani Russians. And the fact that we see that a lot of Kazakhstani Russians, by and large, feel their commitment to Kazakhstan, which we can't see through these necessarily through these statistics on dual citizenship prosecutions, but we can see through the idea of a daily plebiscite, which comes from the work of Ernest Renan, or the idea that there's just a lot of people, a lot of ethnic Russians that are continuing to work and live in Kazakhstan and continuing to participate in what it means to belong in Kazakhstan. So the implications are, I think, really crucial, because this is a question of who gets to belong in Kazakhstan. It also has important implications for our scholarly work in terms of how we reuse categories that are handed down by the government, that are put on passports, that are put in identity cards, and whether these whether these categories are actually doing the work that we want them to, or do we need to kind of complexify these categories or find alternative categories to help actually represent the realities, the complexities, the hybridity that is actually occurring on the ground. I'm going to leave it at that and hand it back to the moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schenk. So, you know, this is really important questions in terms of the public policy. And of course, really appreciate just this question arise not only by our politicians, but also just by the outside expert point of view, because it's really important just to have such called evidence-based decision-based policy making. And actually, when we have some empirical data, when we have just some the data coming from the survey, we can do the real decision making, which is more important for nowadays, such called the new Kazakhstan, because a lot of politicians, a lot of experts, including myself, just we are more oriented for the data analysis and how we can use it, such called the data analysis in terms of decision making. Thank you very much for this great research. So, and now I'm going just to give a floor for the last for today. It's a real honor just for the Professor Sin Roberts, just because actually he is also a very known person in terms of researching of such called Uyghurs questions. So, which is not only the Kazakh policy questions in terms of the many researchers, we can find that this is a really interesting questions which are raised by many researchers. And he's a professor of practice in international affairs. Moreover, he is a director of the May International Department Studies Program at the George Washington University Elite School of International Affairs. And when I just prepared to moderate these sessions, I found that he is the author of many publications, and among them, just one of his very interesting publications, which was published by Princeton University in 2020, which is named like the book, The War on the Uyghurs. So, and according to the some feedbacks, this book was recognized by Journal of Foreign Affairs as one of the best of book for 2021. Congratulations with this. So, and his topic for today's is the Xinjiang crisis and its impact on inclusive development in Kazakhstan. The floor is yours, Professor. Yes.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, you know, just to kind of comment on this idea of inclusive development, it's something of a cutting edge idea in global development now, in terms of trying to get everybody, leave nobody behind the development process. And I do think, I applaud the government of Kazakhstan for thinking about this sincerely. And I think, as Ambassador Nazarbayev said this morning, this inclusiveness is important for the future development of Kazakhstan. And I'm going to talk about the crisis in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which I often refer to as the Uyghur region in China. And this is something of a, I guess, complicating issue for inclusive development in Kazakhstan right now. And for the topic that we're discussing. So first of all, I'm not going to go into depth about this, what we might refer to as the Xinjiang crisis, but since 2017, we've seen that the Chinese state has carried out basically a systematic approach to erasing the culture of the indigenous peoples of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And this includes both Uyghurs and ethnic Kazakhs. And this includes mass imprisonment, mass internment in re-education camps, on the alleged idea that people who end up in these camps are prone to radicalization. And, you know, just to kind of accent the relationship to Kazakhstan here, one of the criteria that would make you possibly interned in one of these camps as if you had visited or lived in Kazakhstan at any time. It also includes a highly documented, ethnically profiled surveillance program, forced assimilation measures, residential labor programs that are also creating mass displacement. And so I think that one of the things that's important about this is that it's essentially erasing the Central Asian aspects of the culture in this region of China. And you can see why this ends up being an issue for Kazakhstan, the largest border of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region that it shares with another country is with Kazakhstan. And as was mentioned by my colleague Eric Schlusel earlier, the history of Uyghurs and Kazakhs, frankly, going cross-border between this area of China and Kazakhstan is very long and has a very rich meaning to people. Uyghurs in Kazakhstan, and actually I thank Aygul Kassova for updating this with the more recent 2021 data, it's at least 290,000. They mostly live in the city of Almaty and regions to the east of Almaty up to the Chinese border. So they're very compactly populated in that area. One part of this population has lived on the territory since the 19th century. Another group came in the 1950s and 60s fleeing China. However, there's another group that's been very impacted by this, and this is the Oromon ethnic Kazakhs from China. Not technically an ethnic minority, although we've already covered today that maybe we don't want to use that term at all, but they certainly are ethnic Kazakhs who are newcomers or returnees to Kazakhstan. And from what I could gather, looking at data, there's probably about 135,000 ethnic Kazakhs from China now living in Kazakhstan, spread throughout the country. And part of this population came to Kazakhstan in the 1990s, another more recently in the 2000s. These two groups have been very much impacted by the crisis in the Uyghur region of China. And in some ways, the ethnic Kazakh emigres from China have been more impacted because they're recent arrivals. There's actually fairly few Uyghurs who come and settled in Kazakhstan in the 1990s and 2000s. There's some who married Uyghurs from Kazakhstan, but mostly when we talk about people who come recently from China, they're ethnic Kazakhs. And these people have lost contact with their families, with their friends in China. And I think this creates an intense feeling of survival guilt for those left behind. I've encountered this just dealing with the diaspora of Uyghurs and ethnic Kazakhs from China in the Washington, D.C. area. I think that, you know, in general, the Kazakhstan government has not reacted well to the Oromon population of Kazakhs in Kazakhstan who are protesting what's happening in China. There was an organization that group founded called Atajurt, and the former leader of that group was pushed out of the country. The group has been able to do some protesting, but some of them have been arrested for that. And it is a very difficult situation for Kazakhstan, I would say. For Uyghurs, I think the way they're impacted by this, the Uyghurs of Kazakhstan, is a little bit different. On the one hand, there's some certainly that have familial and friendship contacts with people in China that they've lost contact with. But in some ways, I would say there's probably less of those than among the ethnic Kazakhs. But for the Uyghurs of Kazakhstan, what's happening in China is kind of an existential crisis. They're losing their culture. I mean, we've talked about different ethnic groups in Kazakhstan that are diasporas, that have homelands, that have places where they could seek their national culture. That's disappearing for the Uyghurs of Kazakhstan. And there's been probably since the 1990s, as my colleague kind of alluded to, the Kazakhstan government has essentially silenced Uyghur activism in Kazakhstan about what's happening in China. It's been very difficult. In the 1990s, there was a lot of Uyghur activism in Kazakhstan, policies in China, and that kind of stopped after Kazakhstan joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, I understand that Kazakhstan is in a very difficult situation with this crisis. It's Kazakhstan's largest trading partner is China. As we all well know, Kazakhstan is a crucial part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. China has major investments in Kazakhstan, and it's become indispensable to Kazakhstan's continued economic growth. And so I'm not even going to address the issue whether Kazakhstan should be politically active in condemning what's happening in Northwest China, but I do think that there are some things that Kazakhstan can do about it. And I want to preface that by saying that in general, Kazakhstan has done an admirable job in terms of including Uyghurs and Orolman in the country's development. Orolman have been given state support with resettlement and have been incorporated into Kazakhstan. I'm sure there's a lot of shortcomings in that, but there has been some very good developments. And Uyghurs have been given a place in Kazakhstan society. In fact, with what's happening in China, Kazakhstan now is really the only location where there are state-supported Uyghur language schools in the world. And that's very important. And there's a Uyghur theater, Uyghur newspaper. And these groups really only encounter major difficulties in Kazakhstan when they become political, and particularly political around issues related to China. But I do think that the Kazakhstan government could do more to support these groups in the context of the current crisis that they're facing. I want to just end my talk by giving some recommendations along those lines. For Orolman and Uyghurs who have close relatives still inside China, the Kazakhstan government could provide more assistance in different ways. One would be to regain access to communications with relatives. Another could be to provide particular mental health services for those suffering trauma from the situation. This is something I've seen the Uyghurs in the Washington, D.C. area have organized themselves to do, because this is a very traumatic experience, and without any kind of support, I think it's very difficult to endure it. And this is a more difficult one. There was actually something that happened in the United States just this week, where there's been an attempt. The FBI has arrested several Chinese nationals who are harassing activists who are from both the Chinese diaspora, the Uyghur diaspora, Tibetan diaspora, and so on. But I think that the Kazakhstan government could work more on trying to ensure the Chinese government does not harass any Uyghurs or ethnic Kazakhs from China on Kazakhstan territory. And it can do so by asserting that this is something that's important to Kazakhstan. Finally, I think this is something I feel very strongly about. Kazakhstan could really work to make it a center of Uyghur culture in the world, and it could really embrace this role. There's already the infrastructure for that. I think it needs more support, more funding, funding Uyghur language schools more. And as I noted, this could be the only place in the world where Uyghur language is kind of maintained on an institutional level. Preserve the great wealth of archives on Uyghur history and language, as well as the history of ethnic Kazakhs in China, and ensure that Uyghur exiles from elsewhere in the world can interact with Uyghurs in Kazakhstan. I think, you know, you're not going to see Kazakhstan host kind of Uyghur example of Dharmasala, which is very political in orientation, but it can do a lot to make sure that Uyghur culture is well preserved in Kazakhstan. I think that also serves as an example of how different Kazakhstan is in its relationships with ethnic groups than, let's say, across the border in China. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Very much, Professor Roberts, and just one remark on probably note for your future, because since 2020, the terms oral month, it's no more used in a public policy because it's officially just in terms of determining the ethnic repatriants or migrants, just to use the term of the Kandas. So this is official, just a nomination of the people who did the migration. So it's also had mentions about some of our participants from the chat, and really appreciate just for your big researching, because it's also one of the how can I say, probably critically arise questions just in terms of the public policy, especially in terms of the ethnicity. And you know that of course, Kazakhstan interethnic society is going step by step, and actually we are trying to cover it a lot of questions. And of course, just as an economist, just I can say that a lot of questions demand a lot of money, and sometimes just we have to distribute it all timely by the budgeting. And this is the questions of also the good management, or may I say the good governance of all of the issues, because you just now had mentioned, and His Excellency Ashokbayev also had mentioned one of the SDGs principles, no one behind. So actually, because this is really important, just the criteria when we are talking about the good governance policy, because when we are trying to cover all of the questions which arise the questions of the society sustainability, actually we're trying to know one behind. And this is one of the important, but sometimes just it demands time, it demands budget. Yes. So, and now I'm opening the sessions because we have another, if I'm not mistaken, 20 minutes. Yeah. Still here. Okay, just 15 minutes. Let me cut it for 5 minutes. Okay, 15 minutes for questions. Please, can we use it microphone? Yes. Is it? Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, sorry there.
I'm Mr. Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. The big question for me, other than the shocking lack of concern that Kazakhs have for their cousins across the border, is why Kazakhstan hasn't sort of said to China, either publicly or sub rosa, let my people go. In other words, make it very clear that Kazakhstan is more than willing to let Kazakhs in China walk across the border and be welcomed there, declared as UNDP refugees, in which case Kazakhstan gets some money for each one of them, and alleviates part of China's problem, which is to get rid of as many Turkic minorities as they can. I mean, we're talking about, although the Uyghurs never tell you this, we're talking about 10 to 15% of the internees are Kazakhs. So it seems like some magic could happen here. And I'm stunned as to why it isn't happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's difficult to know what kind of quiet diplomacy Kazakhstan's been doing on that. I mean, there seemed to be evidence early on that there was a flow of Kazakhs coming from China. And you know, I see you kind of pointing out money and
Yeah, those were paid exit fees. The prison camps were bribed and several hundred, maybe a couple thousand came out, and Chinese officials made good money off it.
Yeah, yeah, and I do think, I mean, it's interesting. I teach a class right now on the Belt and Road Initiative, and we look at kind of the whole world in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, and I think host countries in dealing with China on these issues have a lot more agency than they think sometimes. You know, there's no doubt that China's economic investment in Kazakhstan is critical to Kazakhstan. But I do think that Kazakhstan could be more assertive in that role. I mean, we even see in Indonesia where there's lots of Chinese investment. Indonesia officially doesn't come out against what's happening to Muslims, Turkic Muslims in the Uyghur region, but they have said that they will not extradite any back to China who end up in Indonesia. I think there's ways that you know, you can, and frankly, particularly for Kazakhstan, because I think Kazakhstan is critical to the Belt and Road Initiative. So Kazakhstan actually has a lot of leverage with China on this. I think it doesn't have to feel that it has to do whatever it's asked. So I do think there's a lot more leverage that Kazakhstan has than it's using. And I think the reason it's not using it, you know, in the situation right now with Russia, all of a sudden China's economic engagement becomes all the more important for Kazakhstan. If there's a way where Kazakhstan can realize its leverage, I think it's really important.
Thank you very much. And there is a question from the chat, and actually it's for you, Professor. It's about how can the Kazakhstan government resist the pressure from China to return escaped Uyghurs from Kazakhstan to their homeland? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to my last answer, but I think that there are things that, I mean, one of the things I've found in looking at the Belt and Road Initiative in comparative perspective, one thing is if Kazakhstan has a policy, it can assert that with the Chinese government. You know, if it's a policy about extradition. Now, I don't know what the extradition agreements between Kazakhstan and China are, which might complicate that. But that's a question that, you know, it's again a public policy question. If you have a blanket policy, for example, in the Belt and Road Initiative, China prefers to not publish agreements, but it always says in all its contracts that if the host government has a law that demands the publication of those contracts, then they will publish them. So I think that if there are policies in place that say, listen, we can't extradite these people because that's our law, and you know, we're not interfering in China's internal affairs, but this is our law, and you shouldn't be interfering in our internal affairs.
Okay, thank you. And probably there is one more questions. Your recommendations are also applicable in regards to Karakalpak people. So, and actually, is it so? A few words about this. Yeah.
Well, I'm not an expert.
But there is a question.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yes. I mean, I think one of the differences is it's unclear what is going to be the ongoing situation for Karakalpaks in Uzbekistan. And, you know, I think that is something I'd have to wait and see what becomes the resolution of the situation in the Karakalpak autonomous region of Uzbekistan. Do they allow that to retain its identity? Which I think is important because both the Karakalpak people and the Uyghurs are in a situation where they do not have their own nation state. And so it is important for the states where those people live to support their national culture, I believe.
Okay, it's also the questions of the interethnic policy. Yes, this is a general question. So or maybe one of the structures, there is question in terms of the public policy. And of course, actually, there is also probably a few comments which is coming from the chat, and I really believe like one of them. This is the questions from the Kylie Matson, and she wrote that we brought up the colonizations a bit, and my question for the second panel is about Kazakhstan's future. What kind of solutions are being presented to restore the damage done by the Virgin Lands campaign? When it comes to extracting Kazakhstan's mineral wealth, is there a focus on doing its sustainability? How is the Aral Sea crisis being addressed? What kind of support does Kazakhstan need to address the Semipalatinsk test site? Let's keep Kazakhstan beautiful. I hope that probably the Professor Kim just you are ready to answer for all of Arai's questions, or probably just your objective and really expert vision about these questions. Are you ready? Herman, please. If you
Okay, that is a great bulk of questions, and I don't think that I'll be able to answer all of them in the limited time. And I would like to contact personally with the guy. I don't know who is it. I scrolled right now the chart, and I missed these questions. And I think it's better to discuss these matters personally. If really the I don't know who is it, student or my colleague scholar, but once is exactly expressed by all these questions, we are facing a lot of the problems, and these problems, I mean, related to ethnic diversity and interethnic relations in the recent Kazakhstan, and they are connected to natural disaster, they are connected to the economic situation, they are connected to the they are like legacy of the Soviet past, and there are new challenges in these new trends of the changing of the ethnic composition of the country, and so on. And that's make me very really difficult to answer exact, precisely, and very short to all these questions. That's is my reason. I'm appealing to the person who addressed these questions to contact me personally.
Yes, thank you very much. And actually, probably Professor Kim, you also will be able to just add some details about the questions of Kazakhstan. So, because it was addressed for me, but actually I'm not probably much eager just to be an expert about the problems with the Kazakhstan, because it was the questions like, Dear Aygul, what will you recommend to the families of Karakal prisoners in Kazakhstan? How we get the illegally detained people out of the prisons? Probably I'm asking or address these questions for all of today's experts. So if you would like to add something, because probably in my mind it's more political questions, and actually in myself I'm not ready just for answer for these questions. Me and because it's really thin big issues, if I understand this problem correctly. But everybody just if you would like to add something, or maybe just if we need to provide some more research about these questions, we can answer like this one. Please just be who is ready to answer for these questions. Probably Professor Sadvakasova, yes, because she's more. Yeah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this question, but I'm not sure what the question about Kazakhstan politics or Uzbekistan politics.
Probably Uzbek.
If this question about Uzbekistan politics, I'm not sure. I did not understand about this. Is not
Our issue.
Information about this situation. I think I agree with Professor Robinson about the depend of clearly agreement between the two subjects of politics. For example, it's autonomy, Kazakhstan and Republic of Uzbekistan. That's all. And the Kazakhstan don't have any autonomy region of the Kazakhstan, because we have just of constitutional rule about unitary type of state. Kazakhstan will not have any agreement with different ethnic groups in the territory of Kazakhstan. It's clearly situation for Kazakhstan, and I don't know about situation in the Uzbekistan, unfortunately. Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much for these excellent additions. Yes, because actually, yeah, this issue was happened last year, but regionally it was happened in our neighbor Uzbekistan. Yes. So, and we have 2 more minutes. Just any questions from the auditorium, please? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Bakhtiar again. Actually, I have 3 questions, but since time is limited, the most important one is I would like to address to you. So you were just talking about the policy, no one is behind. Don't you think that Kazakhs in rural areas are actually left behind already? Don't you think so? Like Kazakhstan government was so working so hard on the keeping all the people united in Kazakhstan, like tolerance and everything. And actually, it seems like at this moment that actually Kazakhs themselves, rural areas in province, they are already left behind. Don't you think so?
Yeah, brilliant questions. and as far as I understand, actually, it was addressed for me, and I will try to answer. You know that due to the new system of the strategic planning of the Republic of Kazakhstan, actually we have a special plan for territorial development. Yes, and actually in the following or in the stepping to providing some measures to implement the plan of territorial development of the Republic of Kazakhstan till 2025, because actually we did it only the midterm period of forecasting. The government also developed just recently the special program for the rural territorial development of the Republic of Kazakhstan, which is also deadline till 2025. And according to, but it's only plan. Yeah, and of course, and I totally agree that we still have a lot of issues just to deal with the rural development in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Let's talk about the quality of life. Let's talk just the shortage to infrastructure development. And mainly, as an economist, I can say that all of the questions, actually, it's really linked to the questions of the budgeting. And according to our strategic planning system, we still have some gap between the central budget and the local budget. And due to this one, just when actually the money is started to distribute it among the 21 regions of the Republic of Kazakhstan, and actually you can see that there are still, because in Kazakhstan we have only 3 regions who are really like presents themselves like donors of the Republican budget. Among them, I have to mention the Atral regions, Astana city, and Almaty city. Other regions are still just demanding money from the central budget. And this is a real question, because if we are talking about the new developed regions, such as the Ulutau regions, such as the Abali regions, and actually they became a new administrative division in the Republic of Kazakhstan, and actually due to the new structure, they also try to demand a lot of money just from the central budget, because they need to provide some structures or organize some administrative rules, etc., etc. And inside of all of the mentioned regions, actually we have rural areas. And if we take into consideration the Gini coefficients, if we take into consideration such called the poverty level, the quality of life, the access to the internet it's really actually not so good situations, but it's still a challenge, all of the raised questions. But due to the newly developed and actually considered plan of the rural development, actually the government tried to focus the attempt from the central budgeting just to the questions for the local government, because according to the sustainable development policy rules, actually all of the efforts also have to be taken with the all of the decisions have to be taken into considerations with the participations of all stakeholders. Among the stakeholders, we have to say there is a population of the rural area, there is a government, I mean just the power or local powers, and of course the business sector. And probably just the question how we can rise the quality of life, how we can do or realize the term no one behind, actually, we have just to pay more considerations for the business development in the rural area, probably like this one. Thank you. And of course, there are a few more questions, but unfortunately, we don't have a time. But some of the questions are already actually was repeated and announced in today's sessions. And I really appreciate just for all researchers, for all experts who did participate for today's sessions. My special thanks just to Professor German Kim, just because he really shared his opinion about the questions of interethnic policy in the Republic of Kazakhstan. We really appreciate for Professor Roberts, because actually one more congratulations with your book, because it's really important. And nowadays we can say that the experts who are written and already have a published book or something, it's so separated, and actually it's really important because we can use it as a guide just for some students or researchers who are really interested for this topic, and not only in around the world, especially Kazakhstan too. And actually we are taking into consideration this question. Professor Schenk, actually really appreciate for your questions which was raised in your collaborative topics with your students, and really thanks for this one. And of course, Beata, and actually the questions for which you raised in your topic, is it slogan or reality? I can say that it's a more like the arise questions too, because it's from one side, we can say that sometimes we do through the slogan policy, but from the other page, just when we listening and hearing such kind of slogan policy, we try to provide some reactions, and this is how can I say it, re-answer policy, because when we arise questions, when we know where we see the problem, actually we're trying to take some steps and just to adopt some measures in the decision-making policy. And finally, just it's really honor to be today's moderators, and I'm really appreciate for this opportunity for the Center for Asian Progress, Asian programs at the elite school. And actually, I'm really separately thank you to you, Professor Eros, just actually for your first sessions, because actually you know that we have two really good, very qualitative sessions. I hope so. And let me say, really thank you for all of you being here, and have a good one. Thank you very much.